So Facebook, Meta, their shareholder call yesterday was an absolute disaster. I was watching it and it was very, very interesting. Kind of the two keywords in that whole thing, no matter how much people tried to focus on the numbers, they would return to metaverse and headwinds. Those were like the keywords throughout the whole call. It was very interesting. I'll be discussing some of the things that Mark Zuckerberg was really focused on, including kind of their own version of Slack, so like business communication, some of their issues, why the stock crashed around 30% due to Apple privacy things, and a lot of other things, kind of combining this all together to give you a little bit better perspective. But a lot of people looked at this kind of top line total revenue year-over-year change around 37%, going from around $28 billion to close to $34 billion. That year-over-year change, yes, that is a positive growth. But we actually saw negative growth in the earnings per share when you actually contrast this from previous years. This growth at 5% is actually very negative. That's kind of one of these headwinds that weren't so good in my personal opinion. And then beyond this, if we look down here at the CFO Outlook summary, one of the things they really focused on was this kind of Apple privacy issue. You know, how Facebook makes money as a free application is obviously through advertising, right? So through these advertising mechanisms, essentially what you can do to become much more profitable is track the users. For a long time, Facebook was kind of looked at, I guess, as kind of like a negative company in that way. You know, they're taking a lot of this data from people, and at the end of the day, this is true, right? But one of the most important things to understand is Facebook doesn't have their own devices, right? So they are reliant on these companies like Apple and Android. Apple specifically focuses on privacy for the users. And I think one of the most important things here to look at is, okay, when you're analyzing different ecosystems in the tech space, they really want to have the staying power, right? So they want to keep you in the ecosystem. This is why metrics like time on app or time on just different things you're using on a different device is very, very important. Now, Apple has shifted away from this, and this article lays it out very, very well here. So they talk about, you know, Meta's warning and its creating stock price were a reminder among tech giants. Apple hoards extraordinary sway because of the control over the iPhone. And the tech industry received a very clear notice that the long-planned shift from how people use information online is tracked. So this was having a dramatic impact on Madison Avenue internet companies that have spent the past years building businesses around ads. So this happened to a lot of them. You can actually see this chart here is quite interesting. Obviously, Snapchat has had the large decrease here, but you know, in the past, I've run digital advertising companies. I run e-commerce companies currently, and part of this obviously is using Facebook advertising. There's multiple different ways to advertise. Google's an interesting option. There's some interesting kind of new options like TikTok, but Facebook for a long time has been very, very profitable. But really, in the past year, we've seen kind of this decline in the return on ad spend there. And I think it's really due to a lot of these kind of privacy shifts and also the generations that actually use Facebook. You know, you ask anyone basically, I would say like under 28, that's obviously a general number. You know, do they use Facebook? They're probably going to call you a boomer and say no. You know, they use these other companies that are in kind of the Meta ecosystem, right? So if we look at these other companies, which technically aren't actually profitable based on these numbers from this Q4 earnings share reports, basically if you look at what we build, I'll break down these companies. So Facebook is obviously the main one. That's where they're actually profitable with. Messenger is kind of that communication application inside of Facebook where you can basically direct message individual users and create groups as well. Then Instagram is kind of the more, I guess, newer version of Facebook, right? So it's a better user interface in my personal opinion. It's not as like toxic as Facebook is. And then we moved on to WhatsApp. This is like a global kind of networking and messaging platform that's used a lot in emerging market countries as well. Oculus is kind of their play in the metaverse, and same with the rest of these. So Workspace is one that I think there's going to be a lot more news coming out about this, but that's Mark Zuckerberg's really focus. He talked about that in this call, where he's focused on business communication platforms, and Workspace is really their focus. It hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but that's the way it is. Portal is kind of like their, I guess, FaceTime, you could call it, right? But they kind of add in these VR mechanisms, and I think they're going to kind of incorporate Oculus, Workplace, Portal, and Novi kind of all together in this metaverse play, right? Because on this conference call, they kept returning to that. Again, you know, as people were like, maybe on the shareholder call, you would be concerned about these numbers. You would be concerned about legitimate, fundamental factors that drive the value of a stock. They kept returning to this narrative around Meta because they've really gone all in on this. And at the end of the day, yes, these things do incorporate. Also, I apologize for the background noise. I'm here in Bogota, Colombia, and this is like a very, very busy street, so hopefully it's not too bad. But anyways, and then Novi is kind of their like digital payment platform, so you actually have your own wallets. Yes, it's under like the Meta branch, but that's kind of their play in the cryptocurrency space, kind of tapping into that. But all of these four are quite interesting, but at the end of the day, like I said, the only one that's really profitable is Facebook. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the numbers there, but I am going to shift over here to the technical charts, kind of show you my view here, and then we'll return to some of these kind of last things as far as the shareholder call and kind of my thoughts around this. Potentially, the actual Facebook app maybe becoming a MySpace type of thing, because their main focus has been kind of mergers and acquisitions of ideas, right? So if, basically if a new company comes along, or a new social media app, they basically copied the features, right? So Snapchat with stories, Facebook copied it, Instagram copied it, YouTube copied it. TikTok with Reels, Facebook copied it, Instagram copied it, YouTube copied it. And they basically prioritize these new features that are kind of the cutting edge. And then we look at the metaverse things, right? So the beautiful thing about the metaverse, I recently made it, or actually about a couple months ago, I made a video on this kind of comparing Facebook. I have a playlist on metaverse investing, basically Facebook to Decentraland, and basically how, in my opinion, like this was going to happen, what happened today, because at the end of the day, Facebook keeps doing this. They keep merging and acquiring ideas, but they don't pay the companies, right? They tried to buy out Snapchat, they tried to buy out all these different companies, but at the end of the day, you can't buy out a decentralized platform, right? So they're tapping into this whole metaverse concept, and I personally think at the end of the day, this won't, Meta might be like, 20 years from now, who's going to like dominate the space? I think will be pretty spread out, but I think most of it will be in a decentralized manner where you actually own your own things in game, right? So in whatever metaverse it is. Again, topic for another day, but that's kind of my view on it. You can watch that video if you want. Maybe I'll link down below in the description. So here we saw this stock really crash here. If you were to short it on this, here, let me pull this out. If I can pull out a short position, let's see. Short position here. If you were to short it right here on this bearish engulfing candle, let's zoom in here a little bit before the meeting here, you would have gone with around, I would have probably set my stop loss right there at the top of the Bollinger Bands, but we saw this bearish engulfing candle, which is essentially where you see a small green candle and then a larger red candle. I talk about, if you're interested in technical analysis, I have a completely free course here on YouTube, no upsell, nothing like that. It just breaks down the fundamentals of technical analysis. I go through everything that you would need to know. You can check that out. It's called Global TA. It's a playlist on the channel, but it's an 8-part series, and it's like each of them around 30 minutes. So if you're curious on this stuff, you can watch that. Nothing to sell you at all on there. But around there was around, so close to a 30% profit, a 5%, or I would have said it a little bit smaller, like probably around there. I probably would have gone closer to like 6 to 7% stop loss, and then set my target right here, just because we have this massive supports level right here where we have multiple touch points. Again, all part of technical analysis, but you would have made a nice little profit there. I personally didn't short the market. I was out to dinner, so I did kind of catch up on some of the like shareholder call, but I wasn't trading the market at this time. Obviously, you could trade this after markets on like decentralized platforms like FTX. But very interesting things to see here, and I'm pretty sure this is actually a record for Facebook, and like I think it's around 10 years this stock has been around, and this has been like the single day where it's dumped the most. I mean, you could probably study the charts, but that's quite interesting. Anyways, before we continue on, I do have to mention today's sponsor, which is Apollo Fintech. They're focused on building blockchain solutions to emerging market economies. They have a lot of interesting options here and a lot of interesting updates. They also have GSX. I have a full video on why I partnered up with them, why I really like them, especially with what I talk about on the channel when it comes to emerging market investing and kind of building this with blockchain technology. They've helped a lot of countries in around Africa. Stephen McCullough has done a ton of incredible things with the national payment platform, the Knox World Pay, the Apollo e-governance platform, essentially like white labeling these services where governments are so slow moving, right? There's so much bureaucracy built up, so much bloat that they don't have the ability to innovate. So they basically provide these solutions, and I really like what they're doing. They have GSX and gold and APL, which is kind of this currency. I'll have the link down below in the description and in the pinned comments if you guys are interested in this, but let's return back to the video. So, as I was saying, this was a nice little short position here, a massive dump there, and I'll be interested to see if we're recovering or, if this trend continues. I think especially seeing this trend right here in the EPS, that is not a good trend, right? 5%, which is less than the previous year's growth, especially in these tech companies, these growth stocks. You want to see increase in that and better every year, right? But we do see, obviously, revenue doing well. Total costs and expenses are kind of increasing a bit. But one of the things they talked about here, and what I was saying with ads and impressions is this is definitely concerning, right? So if you run a company and you're using Facebook ads, you're using Instagram ads, you're maybe doing these kind of different types of placements, you do see that there's a lot more profitability on Google's platform. And Google actually recently had, like 2 days ago, they talked about this stock split. So it was a 20-to-1 stock split. Basically, that was very bullish for the stock. Over the day, it's been basically flat. Even though Facebook dumped, that shows that it's not really correlated, and quite interesting in my personal opinion. I think YouTube, the model is fascinating, right? So if you compare something like YouTube or Netflix is basically a media company, right? And YouTube, and I guess Facebook, you could include this as well, but Facebook has a harder time now monetizing these things, especially like Reels, like this new service, but YouTube is killing it, right? So they're incentivizing people to use Reels. They talked about this kind of on their creator thing, I personally don't use Reels that much, honestly. Like, I'm not too focused on growing the channel. This is more like in my free time when I'm discussing different stocks and investments. My main business is helping people with e-commerce things, and then also helping with second passports and residencies, kind of on a consulting basis. That's kind of the main Invest Global thing. But these videos for me are just fun, right? So even though YouTube is like prioritizing, they're saying like you'll grow faster if you use Reels. I'm not like about the TikTok kind of like TikTok like ADHD type of thinking as much as I like the long form things, right? So even though none of this is scripted, none of these things are like pre-planned, this is basically just free flow thinking. I think YouTube, the model is so much more interesting than something like Netflix, because Netflix is really a production company, right? So they'll license things and different movies put on there. But YouTube, basically, it's a win-win, right? So users create content, they can monetize, and a YouTube can monetize, right? So at the end of the day, this kind of like a spiral, kind of like windmill that's really, really good for profitability. But Facebook is kind of dropping in this in a way. I think in the past, they've been seen as kind of this front runner, but I think over the next really decade, we'll see new things emerging, especially when you go back to what I was talking about with different basically features inside of these different social media applications, right? So you look at Facebook, what it used to be, right? The history of kind of the user interface. Personally, I've never really used it. I always use it for business. But at the end of the day, like, it used to be a natural feed, right? So like if one of your friends posted something in that second, that would show up at the top and it would be like chronological order. But then they shifted to a more algorithmic based thing. So they would basically incentivize different things that typically would help you click on things that will help you keep on app, engaging things, right? And sometimes those are things that typically cause emotion. And that's where Facebook has got a lot of pushback. But I just think overall, this is fascinating what's going on here. I'm curious what you guys think. Let me know down below in the comments what you think about Facebook, this whole shareholder call. If you have any questions, any comments, anything like that, just let me know. Beyond that, I mean, there's not too much more I want to talk about, but I would actually pay attention to what they're doing in the metaverse, right? So some of the things are going on behind the scenes, like Workspace, Portal, and Novi, but I personally would pay attention to this, even if it's just like updating yourself like 5 minutes every week on what Facebook is doing, because I think identifying these trends early and then also looking at, okay, what companies are innovating and doing a better version of Novi, of Oculus, of Workspace, of Portal, right? The niche there, right? And that's the smaller cap companies that potentially have a lot higher upside, especially in emerging market countries. So that's all for today's video. It was a little bit of a rant, very, very fast paced, but if you enjoyed it, like the video, subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, hit the notification bell and click all. You can follow us on Twitter at investglobal_IO. We also have a Telegram group, just a group of like-minded investors. That's linked down below in the description as well, along with all of the must-watch videos. I'll be doing a lot more videos in this month, so I hope you guys stay tuned. Took a little break here, enjoying beautiful Bogota, Colombia. As always, invest global, and until next time.